almost a psychic, you understand the word psychic? ESP? There's almost a psychic attraction. You're not sleepwalking, you're not dreaming, you're really conscious, but something is making you brave. Something's making you get closer and closer to the corn stalk. Although I would use the flashlight as a weapon, meaning if you're afraid, I think rather than holding the flashlight comfortably down here, you hold it out like that. It's kind of like a lance, a magic user lance, as you walk through here. And I would come out of the house this way. I'm going to have you walk down the corn sideways, looking in here, and actually you'll be making the beam go across the lens, which looks very pretty. And also it's kind of scary. My appetite has always been to, put a lot of value on the screen, and sometimes the people become somewhat diminished because of the story that surrounds them. But with E.T., I had always really wanted to tell the story of a disenfranchised and lonely boy in a relationship with siblings, a sister, a brother. I had 3 younger sisters. And I also wanted to tell a story about the divorce of my parents.
Dad would believe me.
Maybe you ought to call your father and tell him about it.
I can't. He's in Mexico with Sally.
And for a while I've been thinking about just a movie about a child's reaction to his parents splitting up when he's still only about 10 years old, and how that impacts him for the rest of his life. And E.T. was on my mind maybe for 15, 20 years, perhaps for a number of years somewhat subconsciously, as a fantasy of mine, as a way to make myself feel less lonely in my life. And also, it was a childhood fantasy to tell the story of a best friend and a special friend who rescues a young boy from the sadness of a divorce. So E.T. sort of came about in stages for me. Close Encounters, which I made in the mid-'70s, was a movie, really, it was really the original movie, and E.T. therefore is the sequel.
One of the things that really, really inspired me to want to work with Stephen was Close Encounters of the Third Kind. The movie had a profound effect on me, and I really feel in looking back that movie, more than anything, was the catalyst that really moved me into saying, this is what I want to do as a career. I want to make movies. And so when I did, in fact, find myself eventually working with Stephen, one of the things that we talked a lot about was the research that he had done during the making of Close Encounters with a man named Hynek. And he asked me to go investigate a particular case
having to do with a farm family that was terrorized one evening by gremlin-like extraterrestrials that surrounded the house and kept trying to gain access to the house and rode the cows through the barnyard and made the people crazy.
And I'd seen this movie called Return of the Secaucus 7. Now, why in the world this had anything to do with E.T.? This is the kind of thing I sort of feel I've lost about myself, and I wish I could get back, and I have no idea where it came from. But for some reason, I was intrigued with John Sayles, and no one knew who John Sayles was at the time. And I went running downstairs after the screening to meet him. And I said, I love the writing in your movie, and I think you might be perfect for this project that I'm working on with Steven Spielberg. Could you come meet with us? So he came over to the Egg Company, he sat down and he met with us. We gave him the research on Night Skies, and he wrote the first draft of Night Skies.
But when I read the script, I just didn't feel that was a movie that I wanted to direct. It was too violent. It turned me against myself and against my own beliefs that anything that would take so many light years and so much technology just to get to the planet Earth, would they come with lasers and missiles and bad intentions? Personally, I never thought that would be the case. I thought they would come here to either observe at a distance or to interact in some kind of healthy way. So it really went against my grain as a filmmaker and as a storyteller to tell an aggressive, scary story about aliens attacking a farmhouse. And that's when everything kind of like changed in my mind. it sort of became, I'm not going to make that movie, but I might make this movie. Raiders of the Lost Ark, we were shooting that sometime around 1979 or 80. We were shooting Raiders. And I remember spending not a lot of time between shots, because I shot Raiders so quickly there wasn't a lot of time to think between shots, but there was a particularly long setup, and I walked out into the desert. I was picking up prehistoric seashells out there, because certainly, you know, the desert in Tunisia used to be the ocean a long, long time ago. Maybe that's where Jurassic Park came from, at least my interest in dinosaurs. I don't know, but that all kind of was a cousin to turning over seashells and suddenly trying to figure out, how can I tell the story of this lonely boy? I'm sitting here, I'm a lonely director in the middle of the desert in Tunisia, making a Saturday matinee serial type of a movie. And I won't go into my personal life, but I was feeling a little bit, separate from, from myself, which often happens when you're directing. You kind of go into a kind of fugue state to make a movie. And I was in one of my fugue states, and I suddenly, bang, this concept hit me. I knew exactly how to tell the story of E.T., and the story began to flood into my mind. And for the next couple of days, during the shooting of Raiders, E.T. pretty much had a beginning, a middle, and an end. Cut. Great. Beauty. Okay, very nice. Good for the charge? Watch it. Great. Beautiful.
You didn't see in the last of the
Henry? Great. You okay? Yeah. That was terrific. What? So kind of like the bones of the story began to fall into place in the middle of the Tunisian desert, looking at seashells. And it took me 2 or 3 days to kind of figure out a story. And then when I had it, I remembered loving this movie called The Black Stallion. I loved that picture so much. And I remember loving the way Carol Ballard directed it, and then discovering or knowing that Melissa Matheson, who was on the set with Harrison Ford, had co-authored the Black Stallion.
I was in Tunisia with Harrison on Raiders of the Lost Ark, and of course I had been around in London where they had started the picture, and so had become friendly with Steven Spielberg and Kathy Kennedy. So we went off to Tunisia, and I had been trying to write a script based on a book I had optioned, and I was very unhappy with it and feeling pretty miserable about myself. And one day we were out in the Sahara Desert, and Stephen was showing me how to find scorpions, that you just turn over a rock, and there they are. So we were turning over rocks, looking at scorpions, and he asked me if I would consider writing a movie for him. Well, of course. I think I did protest that I was never going to try to do that again.
And I kind of worked on her. I worked on her and kept nagging her about. Went to Harrison. I said, Harrison, talk to your wife. I think she should write this movie. And then I remember Kathy Kennedy went after Melissa and tried to talk her into it. And between Kathy Kennedy and Harrison Ford, I think the two of them talked Melissa into at least doing a first draft for me. And so that's how it all got started.
Many of the scenes from the movie, E.T., come from my own experience being with children. For instance, Harrison's son Willard was very involved with Dungeons and Dragons at the time I was writing. So the boys in E.T. are playing Dungeons and Dragons. It was a nice metaphor for what was coming within the movie. But I would ask the Willard and Benjamin, Harrison's sons, and their friends and other people, what they would like from an alien, what they would like his powers to be. A lot of the children would mention the obvious of telepathy or telekinetic powers, but I was struck by the fact that several of them mentioned that they would like, if this magic creature came into their life, they would like him to be able to heal. And I thought it was such an incredibly poignant idea to come from a child. And they weren't talking about save someone's life by healing. They were talking about take the owies away. And I thought it was just so simple and such a personal idea coming from a child. And, of course, E.T. heals.
Ouch! It was poison. Ouch! You get to save my life. Tink, dear Tink, are you dying?
Ouch.
Tell me what she is saying. She says she thinks she could get well again.
And I was very interested also in that E.T. would communicate often psychically, could be able to reach out to Elliot in school and give him ideas while he was sitting in class. And if E.T. got drunk, Elliot got drunk.
As we get started with the dissection, remember that the things that you are writing down.
And Elliot would start becoming and feeling E.T., a feeling that E.T.'s psychic spirit was inside of him. And that was really interesting. And those were ideas. I didn't know where it was going to go. Melissa didn't know where it was going to fall into the structure of the movie. But these were just like the wish list of, can we put this in the movie? Can we put that in the movie?
I think Steven Spielberg and I decided very early on that we didn't want to have any adults, mucking up the works, basically. And if it was important for a couple of reasons. First of all, E.T., being this little creature that he was, only lived with people of his own size, basically. That the world that he saw, the earth that he saw, was small. It was filled with little people. So when he went back to his planet, he would basically be reporting on a planet that was populated by children, which we thought was kind of a poetic idea. And secondly, for Elliot, Elliot had to have the power in the movie. If for a moment an adult took the power away before it became a matter of life and death, then Elliot would have lost all of his magic.
I never wanted to show grown-ups in the movie until the very end. I wanted to suggest them, show them from the waist down, kind of like a Tom and Jerry cartoon, where the mom of the house comes in, you only see it from the waist down. Later we did that kind of even better with Roger Rabbit, when Bob, did that same technique with Roger. But that's almost a requirement of cartoon. The whole cartoon world, when you have animals as cartoon characters, adults are not often shown. I like those old Tex Avery cartoons where you only see the people from the waist down. And I was also raised on cartoons. I was raised with television, raised with cartoons, and it just made sense to me to create a world. I didn't want that world contaminated with anything beyond at most a 14-and-a-half-year-old's point of view.
Some of the things that you should be looking for during the dissection is to locate the heart and notice that it is still beating.
And as I remember it, I would write for 4 days, 5 days in my little office in Hollywood, and then I would drive out to Marina del Rey, where Steven Spielberg was editing in a little apartment on the beach. And I'd bring in my pages, and we'd sit and we'd go through the pages and say what worked, what didn't work, where we'd go from there, talk about the next hunk that should be written. Then I'd go back to my little office and do my writing and come back again a few days later to meet him. And it took 8 weeks for us to get the first draft, which was quite fast, I think.
And she delivered this 107-page first draft to me, and I read it in about, I'm a slow reader, but I think I read that in about an hour. And I was just knocked out. It was a script that I was willing to shoot tomorrow. I didn't really want to do a lot with it. It was honest, and it was right from both of our hearts, but Melissa's voice made a direct connection with my heart.
I was having lunch with Willie Hunt, who was an executive at MGM at the time. In fact, we were discussing Poltergeist, because we were making Poltergeist at the same time. And Steven came running into the commissary with the screenplay, and he said, "I've just read Melissa's first draft, and we could shoot this tomorrow. It's the best first draft I've ever read." And I think in many respects, Steven would say that that's true even today.
I was going to do E.T. for Columbia, and I think they liked the script. They didn't dislike it. And there's a number of rumors I heard, and I don't want to report a rumor because I don't have any facts to base this, but by hook or by crook, Columbia chose another movie they had in development called Starman that eventually became a wonderful movie starring Jeff Bridges. They chose that over E.T., and they said, "But look, we're not going to make your movie, but we'll certainly give it back to you to take anywhere you'd like." And I got the rights back and took it immediately to Sid Sheinberg, my mentor, my friend, and the head of Universal Studios, and I showed him the script, and I even at that point had even we had I believe E.T. in clay. We had the head in clay, and we had some visual concepts that I had done with Ed Verreau on paper. And I remember sending Sid the script and a picture of a clay bust of E.T. and some drawings that Ed Verreau had done to decide whether he wanted to make the movie or not. And the next day he called up and he said, "I think it's a very good idea for a movie. Go ahead and do it." So we set off to make the picture at that time. Well, when I was about to produce Night Skies from the John Sayles script, I hired Rick Baker. Undoubtedly, the best creature, designer, at that time ever. And to this day, Rick Baker and I continue to work together and do films together. He's just a genius. He designed some really incredible aliens, but I kind of didn't want 7 incredible aliens. I wanted one special character. And I remember when I went to Rick and I said, "I'm changing this whole thing. We're not making this movie anymore. Instead of making another movie about one creature who comes down and befriends one small boy," Rick had done so much hard work on these multiple creatures that I think Rick was just sort of let down because his whole creature shop was devoted to a larger palette, and I was now restricting him to just one character. And Rick was disappointed that we weren't going the whole route, and I think Rick and I decided together that this wasn't perhaps a film that we should do together because this was not what Rick expected to do. He was hoping to do something much different. And Rick said, "You want to make a kids movie?" And I said, "That's right." I said, "Actually, I think E.T.'s not going to make a lot of money. I think I'm making a movie that is only going to appeal to kids." And I agreed that Night Skies was much more of a broader audience picture, certainly a scarier movie. We'll get more teenagers in. And I said, "Yeah, I'm probably making a big mistake. I'm going to make an old-fashioned Walt Disney movie about an alien and a kid, and that's going to be all it's going to be." And so I think we had an understanding. We separated, and I went off to try to find a designer for my single creature. And I first went to Stan Winston, who did a kind of really interesting design. I had one concept for E.T. that was pretty consistent with all the designers, and that is I didn't want anybody to think that E.T. was anything other than an actual extraterrestrial. Therefore, it couldn't look like there was somebody in a suit. And I wanted him to be only 3 feet tall. So I said, I need him to have such a small neck, and I want the neck to telescope like a turtle coming out of a shell. And so Stan Winston did me a very interesting creature, just like that. The face was out here, the neck was back here. It was really a curious creature. But I was shopping. I wasn't, I told Stan, I'm shopping. I'd like you to do a creature. If I like it, we'll work together. At the same time, I went over to Carlo Rambaldi, who had done my creature in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He had designed Puck. And Puck had a very tiny neck that defied a human being being inside that suit. And that was a concept, I think, that I came up with even back during Close Encounters. And then Carlo did a couple designs for me, and simply, I love Carlo's designs. Ed Verreau had been sketching E.T.'s face with me at my beach house on weekends, and we gave Carlo about 4 or 5 or 6 sketches that Ed had done.
It first started with myself and Carlo Rambaldi working directly with Stephen, doing drawings of E.T. And in the early stages, we didn't really know what E.T. was going to look like because we were just sort of talking about him, okay? I think that we actually, at some point fairly early on, had set down some ground rules. That is that E.T. isn't a monster.
I remember saying to Carlo, here's some pictures of Albert Einstein, Ernest Hemingway, and Carl Sandburg. I love their eyes. Can we make E.T.'s eyes as frivolous and also wizened and as sad as those 3 icons?
The thing I really remember very specifically working with Stephen was actually going into his office and his having all these books and saying, here, those are neat eyes, that's a neat mouth, look at this person. And I mean, they were really interesting because they would be some very, very, very old people. and you'd get these very old wizened eyes and stuff, and he would say, yeah, he said, I see that, that's nice. The way we worked with this stuff is Carlo and I would go away for a day or two, and we would just draw a lot of stuff. We would just basically shotgun. And then we would go back to Stephen's office, and we would basically pin the stuff up on the wall, and then Stephen would look at them and say, well, you know, I like that, or I like a bit of this, or that's an interesting nose, or whatever.
Carl did a number of versions in clay, and I stood over Carlo and worked with him. I'm not an artist, so I didn't touch the clay, but I would say too scary, too Disney, too sweet. And finally, this creature did emerge from clay after a couple of weeks that was E.T., that became E.T. I was not happy with any of the eye work that we were doing on E.T. The eye looked like it was a painting against almost plastic, and it didn't have depth or anything. And I kept saying, well, who does glass eyes? Because glass eyes look really real. A person has a human eye and a person has a glass eye, and often you can only tell the eye is glass when one eye wanders and the other eye stays fixed straight ahead. And I just kept saying to Kathy, go find me somebody that makes real glass eyes, and let's give them a job working on E.T. So Kathy went off and found Beverly, who worked at the Jules Stein Eye Institute, and came on board and did this wonderful job of making a rather, overlarged, oversized glass eye for us. And I just said, whatever E.T. looks like inside, I want to be able to see his organs. When he turns on his heart light, I want to be able to see the organs around the light moving and kind of breathing and moving in a strange way. And I think it was Craig Reardon and Short who said, well, I understand from your script that you think E.T. is a plant. And I said, yeah, I don't think he's a mammal. He's not a bird. He's not a fish. I think he's a vegetable. And they said, well, we have this concept of maybe making his insides look a bit like a plant. Would that be okay? I said, that's fantastic. Go ahead and do it. So they had this idea of doing something very plant-like with the inside of E.T.
But we did get to a point where I finally just kind of threw up my hands and I said, I don't know how this is going to work. I don't know how in the world we're ever going to get E.T. to move in a way that you're going to believe without putting somebody in a suit. So I called up Stephen's lawyer's partner, Harold Brown, and he had a 4-year-old daughter at the time. She's now, I think, graduated from Harvard or something. And I said, look, I just want to test this. I feel that if I can put somebody in a suit and video it and show Stephen, and it works on some level, we certainly don't have to rely on this, but we can at least use it for some shots. But he's never going to go for this unless we can show him. Would you be willing to bring Rachel to Carlo's shop and we'll put her inside the suit? And Harold said, okay. So by the time he arrives, this 4-year-old is completely hysterically crying and is not into doing this at all. And Harold comes over to me, he goes, I don't know if this is going to work. I've tried to bribe her with 2 McDonald's and it's not working. I told her we go to McDonald's after she does this. She could have 2 burgers, she could have any milkshake she wanted, and she still doesn't want to do it. So I go over and I try to talk to Rachel. She gets a little bit calmed down. She gets the suit on. By the time we get the head on, she is completely hysterical again. And she's jumping up and down and screaming and crying. And Harold said, just roll tape. So we roll tape. And the tape we end up having to show Stephen is this hysterical, crying 4-year-old in the suit. But he bought it. And he said, okay, I agree. This may be the way we have to go.
So I thought, couldn't we find a little person to be inside E.T.'s bodysuit when he walks around and moves around? And the person who did most of the work was Pat Bailon. Pat Bailon made, I think, the strongest, most used contributions in all the walking scenes of E.T. But there were things that other people had to do. A wonderful young boy, Matthew, who didn't have legs, was able to walk on his hands. He did the most memorable sequence when E.T. walks into the room having had a few too many beers and was stumbling around and falling on his face, and Gertie knocked him over when she opened the refrigerator door and he fell over backwards, and that was all of Matthew's contribution. And then Tamara DeTroth did the very opening scene where E.T. comes out of the woodshed and places the Reese's Pieces on Elliot's sleeping bag. Tamara also did the last scene in the movie where E.T. walks up the gangway holding the flowers that Gertie had given him, and that was Tamara's contribution. When I saw the mechanical arms that Carlo had designed, they were really great, but they still, this is technology back in the early 80s, so the technology then, they were very jerky when they worked. They could move, the fingers would move, but almost too thoughtfully. And the arms always had what I call wagga wagga. An arm would stop and go wagga wagga wagga, or like wagga wagga. And the arms were just becoming a little bit ungainly, like that. And it was, and I felt, my God, E.T.'s got to have almost balletic arms, almost like the hands of a mime. So I just put it out there, can we hire a mime? And we'll put the E.T. hand makeup on a mime's hands so the artist can really be artistic about picking things up and touching themselves and reaching out and touching Elliot and Gertie and Michael. And so this is where this wonderful mime artist came to work with us.
All sorts of things evolved through the process of filming, one of which were the hands, which was Caprice Roth.
I remember a wonderful moment where Caprice's had a lot of coffee in the morning when we came to work early, and we began to work, and her hands were actually shaking. And I thought she was doing it, she had found something about E.T.'s character. And that same scene was a wonderful moment where E.T. is trying to express him or herself. And E.T. was eating some watermelon. And there was a little bit of watermelon that was on the lip. And Caprice always had this monitor that she could look at. The most natural thing in the world was she reaches up, takes a little piece of errant watermelon off of the lip. I mean, who would have thought of that except somebody who was very in touch with human behavior? And she really had a great understanding of just the way the human body moves and what we do with our hands and our face and our bodies. And it's a tiny moment that people don't ever recognize in the movie, but I'm really proud of what she brought to that scene, just by taking a little piece of food off the lip, brought E.T. to life like that. He was alive in that moment, completely alive. Nobody was running him. There were no wires. There were no servo motors going. That was really someone from somewhere else.
E.T. phone home, E.T. phone home. E.T. phone home.
Take your hand away from his mouth.
E.T. phone home.
Go, gag him again. Good. Now take your hand away. Stop for a second. Looks like he's going to behave. And then he says it again.
E.T.
Gag him.
phone home.
And cut.
I always felt that E.T. had 12 hearts. And each heart belonged to the operator, one of the operators that had a function that was able to move his cheek, create a smile, create a blink, create a pulsing of blood through veins in the neck. But they were all E.T.'s fathers, or I used to call them E.T.'s hearts. My favorite E.T. is the one that touches his heart and he looks up when he sees the spaceship descending through the trees to come to get him at the end of the movie. That was my favorite all-time E.T., and that was an E.T. completely operated by wires, by pulling on wires that moved, armatures that stretched the latex of the skin and gave E.T. his look of wonder.
One of the things Stephen knew from the very beginning was that E.T. would be a very shadowy, hardly seen figure in the early stages of the film, that we would take a while to discover him. So it became, what color should he be and what texture should his skin be for the initial stages where we were to barely see the outline of this creature. And one of the things we tested was different colors. I remember him being everything from somewhat of a green to much more purple than he wound up. And that brownish skin with purple overtones evolved out of those early tests. And initially I was shooting footage of just the head, and I know what would annoy Stephen was if I lit it too much, if there was too much detail about E.T. in the shot. He said, no, we're seeing him too clearly. And even in those early stages, we evolved the procedure of using a strong backlight on him, his face largely in shadow, and just the glint in the eyes. And that was the way the beginning scenes of E.T. were, other than those brief glimpses in the flashlights in the corn stalks. And that guided us into the style where once we had E.T.'s lighting down, it was how to light the scene around him so that it all made sense. And one of the first things I said when I read the script is that everything to do with the house and the neighborhood and the family all had to be very, very real, that you couldn't have any false, mysterious type of things. Everything had to be naturally motivated because the magic would happen with the presence of E.T. And when E.T. came into the house would remain the same outwardly, but in the room and in the closet it would be transformed into this magic place.
I'm keeping him.
What is it?
He won't hurt you, Gertie. He won't hurt you, Gertie. I'm not gonna hurt you.
Do you remember the original title?
It was A Boy's Life.
Yep, that's it.
And then it was E.T. and Me.
Uh-huh.
Remember that?
Yeah.
And we got hats and shirts.
That said E.T. and Me.
E.T. and Me.
Wow.
But I don't know what it was like for you, but like I was in town and I had done 2 other things before that. And I was doing post-production work on one of these projects and didn't really even have an agent. And somehow I got this meeting set up and went in for an audition. And even then I hadn't read a script for the project. I didn't even know what it was about.
I had not been able to find an Elliot. I had looked for a long time, at least 6 months, could not find an Elliot. Actually, had made an offer to a boy who I thought was Elliot, and then the parents, didn't want him to do the movie, and there was a dispute about money, and it didn't work out, so that fell through. And I was really only about, I'd say, 4 or 5 weeks away from shooting the movie without an Elliot. And I remember hearing from Jack Fisk, had just made a movie, and he had used this kid named Henry Thomas. And he recommended through our casting person that I take a look at Henry.
Well, my audition was kind of scary. It was, as I said before, I mean, when I went in there, I started reading, and these 2 random scenes. I hadn't read a script. I just kind of knew a brief synopsis of what the story was about. And I read these 2 pages like 3 or 4 times, and it was really bad. I remember thinking, God, this is horrible. I'm not going to get this part. I'm not reading very well.
I think in a funny way, with children, you almost know the minute they walk into the room whether you're in fact looking at the character, because they do come in some way and claim the role. And usually that's because you're in fact casting some element of their existing personality. And that's what you're looking for in terms of trying to find the character.
Stephen said, well, let's do an improvisation. Let's, here's a situation. You found this creature and you love it, and it's like your dog. You have a dog at home? Yeah, I have a dog. Well, it's like your dog. It's kind of like your pet, and they're trying to take it away from you. The government's going to take it away and do experiments.
And I got behind the video camera, turned it on, and that's what happened. And that's who Henry was, and that's how Henry convinced me that he was Elliot.
Is it true? Is there an alien in this house?
Yes, sir.
Well, as you know, I am from the government. I'm part of the United States government, and I am empowered to take that alien with me.
But you can't take him away. He's mine.
Well, but the government is bigger than you are, Elliot. And I have all the authority to take him, and I gotta tell you, I'm gonna take him.
You can't take him.
Well, I'm afraid I have to, son.
You can't take him away. He's mine.
But it's not my choice. The president asked me to come here and get him.
I don't care what the president says. He's my best friend. And you can't take him away.
Well, it's real possible, Elliot, that he'll come back and you can have him again. But we just want to talk to him and see where he came from and try to find out about other planets. And he probably is the key to a lot of things that we have to know.
But how do I know you're going to bring him back?
Well, I'm afraid, son, I can't guarantee it.
I think he's afraid of you.
That may be true, but the government tells me what to do and I just follow their orders.
Well, he's mine, and he lives with me, and he likes me. And he wants to stay here. He likes it here.
Well, we wouldn't hurt him or anything. All we want to do is talk to him.
But I don't want you to take him away.
You know, I've had to talk to your mom about it, and she knows that the government has the right to do it.
And who told you all this?
Well, we learned about it. We know that he's somewhere around here. I mean, I do have a search warrant. I could look around the house.
Tell me, GPI. Right. Tell me.
Well, I'll tell you what. If you let me talk to him for 5 minutes, I'll tell my boss that you can keep him. Would that be okay with you, if I could just talk to him for 5 minutes? Would you feel better then? Would you be happy if you could keep him if all I had to do was talk to him for 5 minutes? That might make your whole day, huh? Might make your whole life, huh? And then he'd be your friend forever. And I wouldn't take him away. Okay, Elliot.
Okay, kid, you got the job. Everybody in the room was in tears. I just remember turning to Henry and saying, okay, kid, you got the part.
I auditioned for Poltergeist originally.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, you didn't?
No.
Really? Yeah, I did.
Wow.
I auditioned for Poltergeist, and Stephen just said, no, you're not right for that, you're right for this, so come back. And I came in a lot of times. And at first, he really just wants to meet you and get to know you, you know, and I was so happy to have a grown-up that would listen to me talk, you know, and he believed in my stories, and he loved them, and it made me feel so good and alive.
When Drew, you know, I met a lot of Gerties, but when Drew came in, she had the part the minute she stepped into the room because she began to make up these stories that she was a punk rocker, she had a punk rock band, she was going on the road, she was going to do an entire, she's 6 years old, and she told me that she's going to do a 20-city tour in America with her punk rock band. And then she kept making up stories, and they got bigger and bigger and bigger and wilder, and she just blew me away. I mean, there was no second choice. I mean, Drew Barrymore was the first choice for this part.
Is he a boy or a girl? He's a boy. Was he wearing any clothes? No. But look, you can't tell. Not even Mom. Why not? Because grown-ups can't see him. Only little kids can see him. Give me a break.
The first I heard of E.T. was actually called A Boy's Life, and what happened was I was doing a play in New York, and they had me come and read for a movie called The Entity in Los Angeles, and I didn't get that part, and the casting director said, well, I hear there's something going on over at Spielberg's office, and Fenton and Feinberg were casting. And so she made a phone call, and I ended up getting in on a late audition for A Boy's Life. And I remember the day of the audition, it wasn't really an audition because they wouldn't allow the script to be seen. So it was more of an interview with Stephen himself.
Now, I want you to take this thing off like Richard the Lionhearted in Robin Hood.
Get the bikes! Meet us at the playground at the top of the hill.
Well, I thought Robert was just a really good actor. He had stage experience. He was the most professional of all the kids. And he was the one that really, you know, was the anchor because he had worked and he had been in front of people before acting, and he was real solid.
Mom, remember the goblin?
Michael, what are you talking about?
Just swear the most excellent promise you can make.
Michael. That's terrific. I didn't have to audition after. I think I had done my audition in used cars, and Stephen is the master at casting. You know, he watches people and has a real talent for taking whatever their quality is and putting them in the role that's right for them. He originally saw me doing hookers and call girls and put me into his mother.
I chose Dee Wallace because Dee was like herself a kid, and I didn't feel I was violating my rule not to have adults in the film until the very end.
The first time I met Stephen, I was brought down by a casting agent named Mike Fenton, who was a big fan, and he really tried to help me a lot when I was starting. And he wanted me to meet Stephen for Indiana Jones. And he asked me, he said, "Can you wear a hat?" I said, "Well, I wear hats all the time." And he didn't really say much. They just, if Stephen was in a room, and he gave me this fedora and told me that I was going to be a swashbuckling adventurer and just go in and meet the guy. And I walked in. As I walked in, I tripped over a lamp stand.
Had I made Raiders a comedy, I would have cast Peter Coyote to play Indiana Jones, but it was just a straight-out comedy because he was kind of awkward and clumsy and stuff. But I think he made a good impression on me, and I remembered him, and then those memories carried over. And I said, whatever happened to that guy that kept knocking things down? You know, when he came into audition for me and George for Raiders and gave him the part. Action. It'll be all right. Would you like the flowers? Cut. Great. Good. Print that one. Last two also. Great. Next shot.
I would hang out with Robert. It would be cool, you know. But when all the other guys kind of came there, then it was like I was the little brother trying to follow the guy around, which worked because that was kind of the character in the beginning, you know. And until I find this this alien, nobody really wanted to be my friend, you know. So, but it's kind of weird though. I mean, we had a great time, I think.
We did have a lot of fun.
I dreamed about there was real ETs, and you know there's like one, and he was in the house playing with. All of a sudden, we heard this giant noise. We went outside, then there's this spaceship. No, really, I had this dream.
And then the thing with Drew worked out perfectly because that was supposed to be the relationship in the movie was us, you know, me torturing her doll or whatever it was. You know, that's how we treated her, and I'm very guilty about it.
Do it, Mike. We have to. Promise? Yes.
One of my jobs as associate producer and writer was to rehearse with the kids, and it was great fun because they're just a lot of fun to hang out with.
Robert, guess what happened today? Elliot's little speech that he says to the elf. I mean, is that plausible?
I don't like that either.
You do have to.
You have to play your
If you're using your
character.
charisma and you have to talk to somebody, then you're supposed to sort of speak in.
Yeah, that's the whole thing of it. You have to role play your
Few
character.
words, right?
You don't
gotta
just
role
say
play.
my character goes over there. You have to role play him.
Right. Okay.
You have
You're
to
an actor.
role
You can do that.
Yeah.
And we'd rehearse, and they would catch me on misspellings, or they'd give me a bad time about some piece of dialogue, or they'd come up with something they thought was better, and I finally had to kind of show them who was boss, I think, at some point, tell them that I was the writer. They were the kids. They'd have to do what I said.
Maybe an elf or a leprechaun.
There was nothing like that, penis breath.
Elliot! Sit down.
It was very strange as a child with things like that because I had been brought up where, you know, kids just didn't say those kind of things, you know. But it was really, I mean, in fact, I got away from saying holy shit. I just had to say penis breath, and that wasn't that bad, you know, because it was an anatomical term, I guess. So I think Grandma could live with that one.